three words to say. No, no, no. That was it. They'd already been there. They'd been there. They'd done that. Now you got other people claiming they've been inside flying saucers and met aliens. No, 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 no. And so the vast majority of UFO researchers in the 1960s and 70s and into the 80s absolutely refused to accept the idea that the abduction phenomenon had a life of its own, was a legitimate phenomenon, and that people, in fact, were being abducted. I was one of those people. I knew about Barney Betty Hill, and I read a little bit about the Antonio Villas-Boas case and all that, but they did not make a pattern. This could still be psychological in origin. And so I was a conservative UFO researcher, and I was not going to go to where the abductees were.
Mm-hmm.
This was the stance that I took until 1982. And in that year, in 1981, I was speaking at a conference in Chicago at Northwestern University, put on by the Center for UFO Studies, and Alan Hynek. Alan Hynek was the sponsor of this conference, and he, of course, was the chief UFO researcher at that period.
Yeah.
And a fellow by the name of Bud Hopkins was there giving a paper about abductions, the abduction phenomenon. Now, I had never heard a paper about abductions before, and I knew that the abduction phenomenon was just nonsense. It was not worth my time. So when Hopkins got up to give his paper, I got up and wandered into the hallway and told jokes with a friend of mine named Marcello Truzzi, who was a professor of sociology at Eastern Michigan University. For the whole hour that Bud talked, rather than waste my time listening to nonsense about abductions. It was more interesting to me to listen to Marcello's jokes. He was a specialist in jokes. He had thousands of them. To hear him than to hear Bud Hopkins. So that shows you sort of where I was psychologically in 1981.
Yeah.
In 1982, a mutual friend, a man named Tracy Torme, who is now a writer, producer in Hollywood, and the son of a famous singer named Mel Torme, called me up and said that he had something very important to tell me about. He was a conspiracy theorist, and he found where the conspiracy to hide the government's study of UFOs was centered, and he couldn't tell me over the phone and all that. Mm-hmm. And so I met him in Central Park in New York, and he told me where he thought it was. It turns out not to be the truth, of course. I mean, it wasn't factually correct. But he said, okay, David, now I'm going down to my friend Bud Hopkins' house. Why don't you come on with me? I said, I don't think so, Tracy. I don't think I want to do that. He said, no, he's a nice guy. He's a nice guy. Come on. No, Tracy, no. Come on. Get in the cab. Come on. Okay. So we go down to 16th Street, where Bud lives. And, of course, Tracy didn't quite know where the address is. We had to go from house to house looking to see if his name was on the doorbell there. And we found it. And here comes Bud Hopkins, who I'd actually shaken hands with the year before, and I didn't even remember that. And the first thing I noticed about Hopkins was he was very, very intelligent. The second thing was this guy was an excellent artist. And if anybody knows anything about Bud Hopkins, he has been an artist all his life. He has done nothing but art for his entire adult life. And he was a member of the New York School, which is a very famous art community in New York City in the 1950s and 60s. And his friends were Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko and all the major figures of the New York School he was involved with. And he began to tell me sort of what he was doing with his abduction work. It was actually interesting. Now, we stayed for an hour or so, maybe 2 hours. Then it was time to leave. So we walk out onto the sidewalk. His house joins right onto the sidewalk in New York City. and walk onto the sidewalk, and he says, "Oh, by the way," he says, "what are you doing this summer?" And I said, "Well, we've just had a baby, and we used to go to Maine, which is quite a ways from Philadelphia, for vacation. But this time, we're not going to do that because of the baby. So we're going to a small town in Cape Cod, which juts out of Massachusetts. And that town is called Wellfleet, and that's where we're going to spend a couple of weeks on vacation." He said, "Wellfleet?" He said, "I own a house in Wellfleet. I spend every summer in Wellfleet." Now, this is a town that is not well known. It was just one of these sort of amazing coincidences. So when we got there in the summer, it turned out that I was staying right close to him, but that's not hard to do in Wellfleet because everything is pretty close together. And he invited me up to his place, and he showed me what he was doing, and he introduced me to some abductees. Of course, I'd never met an abductee before, and it was actually sort of remarkable what he was finding. I came back to Philadelphia, and I called up Alan Hynek, and I talked with Alan and his wife, Mimi, and I said, I just came back from Wellfleet, and I talked with this guy, Bud Hopkins, up there, and, Alan, I said, I think he's on to something. I think he's found something here. His stuff was not as crazy as I thought it was going to be. I think he's really, this is an area we should look into. And Alan said, no, don't do that, David. You just stick with UFOs. Don't go into that abduction stuff, I said, I don't know, Alan. He was pretty impressive, and his work was impressive, too. And, I think, this is something we should look more into. He said, no, don't do it. Luckily, or I did not take his advice. Actually, I probably should have taken his advice. But I didn't, and I continued to communicate with Bud, and he invited me up to his house after the summer was over with, and I had attended abduction meetings that he had with abductees, and I sat in on sessions that he did with people, and this is 82. By 1986, I had decided to do hypnosis and to find out what this was all about myself, and so since 1986. I have been doing nothing but hypnosis with abductees. That's essentially what I do these days, and so that's sort of the story of how I ever got into this. Anyway,
yeah.
Bud Hopkins is my closest friend in the world, and we talk all the time and all that, so that's what I do. So then the question is, well, what is a typical abduction event?
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote about this in Secret Life, and in my second book called Secret Life, which was just sort of a typical abduction event that everybody goes through. And basically, a person is taken out of their normal environment, and they're taken on board a UFO, an alien craft, shall we say. Their clothes are removed. They're put on a table. They have a series of reproductive, physical, and mental procedures run on them, administered to them. There's a series of other events that happen to them. They might have to hold a bizarre-looking baby, something that Bud discovered in the early 1980s, a baby that looks sort of half human, half alien. They might have to do other procedures that are involved with that we know about. They're then taken back into the room where their clothes were taken off. Their clothes are put back on. They're taken back to their normal environment, which might be their car, their backyard, their bed, their couch, wherever it is. And within seconds, not minutes, but seconds, they have forgotten what has happened to them. They know something odd happened. For example, if they're driving somewhere, they know that they've been driving at 60 miles an hour or whatever it is, for 4 hours. And now it's, and they've been on the road for 2 hours, and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, let's just say it's for everybody to understand it. It's 10 a.m. It's 10 o'clock in the morning, and now it's suddenly 12 o'clock, and yet they're still driving. They're on the road, but they're in the same spot more or less, which of course is not possible. That is just not possible.
Yeah.
Now,